police officers. Police officers have to go toward the danger. They can't go away from the danger. And these officers, we should take our hats off to these first responders.
Indeed. Ted Williams, thank you much. Appreciate you being here. As always, watch developments out of Aurora as they happen. Jeff Paul on the ground there. Ted, thanks. All right, and with that, President Trump facing a legal challenge now, less than 24 hours after declaring a national emergency in his effort to bypass Congress to fund more of his border wall. Ellison Barber joining us now with the latest on what the president did and then the legal challenges filed this morning. Hi, Ellison.
Hey, Leland. So before President Trump stepped foot in the Rose Garden, there were already threats of legal challenges. At least one is in the system. It was filed yesterday on behalf of 3 landowners in South Texas and a nonprofit environmental group. The environmental group says that their members' ability to observe wildlife will be impaired by a border wall, and critical wildlife habitat is going to be destroyed. The federal government reportedly told those landowners that if money became available in 2019, parts of the wall would be built on their property. The ACLU is planning to file a lawsuit early next week. At a press conference in California, the state's governor and attorney general told President Trump they will see him in court.
President Trump got one thing right this morning about his declaration. When he said, I didn't have to do this. He's right. He didn't have to do this. In fact, he can't do this, because the U.S. Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the powers to direct dollars.
I don't want to be a sparring partner with President Trump. We want to be a working partner. But he makes it almost impossible when he plays these games and manufactures a crisis and creates the conditions where we have no other choice than to sue the administration.
In Washington, there is a lot of opposition, a lot of outrage from Democrats. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer say they will defend their constitutional authorities in the Congress, in the courts, and in the public, using every remedy available. The chairman of the House Judiciary Committee sent a letter to the president asking him to make White House counsel available, and also officials with the Department of Justice. They want them to come over for a hearing in the coming days. Leland?
Yeah, already 50 or so Democratic members of the House on record on this. Ellison Barber following it this morning. Ellison, thank you.
You bet.
For some perspective from the Republican side of the aisle, I spoke earlier with Arizona Congressman and member of the House Freedom Caucus, Andy Biggs. Congressman Biggs, thanks for joining us from your home state of Arizona.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
Well, Congressman, I'd like to start by just talking to you about the border security bill that just passed. You voted against it, and you urged President Trump to veto it. So I'm curious, what would you have preferred to see happen? Would you have preferred to see another government shutdown?
No, what I had done is I had sponsored a continuing resolution, a short-term spending bill with a number of other members of the Republican conference. That would have allowed us at least time to read the bill, number one, but it also would have kept the government open, and it also would have allowed the president to begin taking the funds that he wanted to do under the emergency order and Title X as he later did after signing the bill. That's why I felt it was necessary to step in and offer that continuing resolution.
So you weren't thrilled that President Trump signed the bill, but you do like the fact that he went ahead yesterday with declaring a national emergency.
That's exactly what needed to happen since he signed the bill. He needs to go and try to get the money. I don't think that his statement undermined it, however, because the Title 10, Section 2808, which is the emergency act that he's operating under for at least a portion of this funding, is really broad and gives incredible authority to the president. Now, whether that's a good thing or not, that's another debate. But the fact that he has that authority, I don't think is undermined at all by him saying, that he didn't have to do this. But I think the point that he is trying to make is it's an emergency. Just wish Congress would have done its job.
But it's hard to see how he's not undercutting it at least a little bit when he says, I'm declaring a national emergency, but in the same breath he also says that I didn't really need to declare a national emergency. It's hard to see how, the threat is this imminent when he makes a statement like that.
Well, I think I'm going to talk about three pots of money. Two of them don't require an emergency. So he's going to get $700 million from the Treasury Asset Forfeiture Fund. Then he's going to take about $2.2 billion from the Title 10, Section 284 Active Drug Trafficking Corridor Fund that he doesn't even have anything to really do with that. That's the Secretary of Defense that makes the adjudication on that. So he's going to get $3 billion. When he says he didn't have to declare an emergency, I don't think he's saying in any way or any stretch that there's not an emergency, that it's not exigent circumstances, because having been on the border recently, having talked to Border Patrol agents even Thursday, finding out more what's going on, it is a real emergency situation. In fact, Fox ran a story Thursday about the number of fentanyl overdose deaths in Arizona. They call it Mexican Oxy. And we've tripled in the last couple of years with the overdose deaths, and that's an emergency.
Well, it's certainly a crisis, and I think the emergency declaration, of course, is going to be challenged in court and in Congress. It's already, President Trump has already been sued, at least by one group, and we know more are coming. I just would like to pop up a Fox News poll that came out this week. We asked voters, would you support President Trump bypassing Congress and declaring emergency to build a wall? 38% favored it, but 56% opposed it. And I'm wondering, are you worried about the potential impact that this might have on the Republican Party, especially heading into 2020, that it might divide it?
Well, that's a great point. And I will tell you, I think that even people like myself who support what the president did, we're all always a little bit careful or concerned about the executive taking this type of authority. But by the same token, Congress has actually authorized this type of activity. So I do get concerned about what the base is going to say. But I also saw polling this week. In fact, looking this morning, the president his activities approved by something like 90% of Republicans throughout the country. Not necessarily for the wall specifically, but overall. And that's pretty solid for the president.
All right. Well, Congressman Biggs, I know this is going to take quite some time to play out in Congress and in the courts. We'll see how it all shakes out. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Kristen. Good to be with you.
Democratic response now from the other side of the aisle. The chairwoman of the Homeland Security Subcommittee on Oversight, Management, and Accountability, the lady from New Mexico, Congresswoman Xochitl Torres-Small. Nice to see you, ma'am. Appreciate you being here.
Great to be here, Leland.
Glad to have you. All right. Politico now reporting there is a flood of requests for people to be co-sponsors of a bill to condemn the president for making this national emergency declaration. You're not among them. Why?
I'm looking into it. What's true is that I don't think this is a national emergency, but we do need resources along our border. I represent one of the rural stretches along the border. And so getting the right mix to achieve border security is necessary, but we need to put that into having enough agents on the ground to deal with these changing circumstances, having the right technology, which can be a multiplier, and making sure that we have the right infrastructure, that we're investing in our ports of entry as well.
When you say infrastructure, fair to say, at least in some of those places, it's going to be a wall, a fence, physical barrier of some type.
So 65% of the border that I represent already has a physical barrier of some type.
Does it work?
There are places where it's effective.
Okay. Beto O'Rourke, I'm sure you've heard this, and if you've been watching Fox News, you've seen this soundbite a lot, says we just want to do away with all of those walls.
And I've come out and said we have to look at the border on a mile-by-mile analysis. So growing up on the border, working on the border, I know that we need different things in different places. And so in places where it takes seconds to minutes to cross the border and then get away without detection, physical barriers can be helpful. In places where it takes days to cross a desert, we need agents on the ground, we need technology, etc.
This brings up an important point. And it's great to have you as somebody who's an expert on this. You represent a district on the border, and what we hear from you is not that different than what you hear from Will Hurd on the other side of the aisle and a little bit farther east from you, but this same sort of much more nuanced response. What's interesting...
I so appreciate you recognizing that.
No, it is a nuanced response, but what's fascinating is you talk to members from either side of the aisle who represent states far from the border, thousands of miles away, and they are experts on exactly what has to happen and dogmatic in their approach. Either tear down every wall or all we need is a wall from sea to shining sea. Is Congress the right place to adjudicate this, of what needs to be where, or is it better to just give a big block of money to Customs and Border Protection and say, you guys deal with it and do what you need to?
Congress is responsible for the funding decisions as well as for the oversight. And that's why when we appropriate funds, it's important to make sure that the agency, that CBP, is using it in a way that adapts to changing threats and circumstances. And as the subcommittee chair, as you mentioned, I think we've got to make sure that that we have enough agents on the ground, that we've got retention, because we're having real challenges with retention on the ground, especially in our most rural stretches.
Right. Well, but when you say retention, there were a lot of Democrats who wanted to limit how many people could be detained as part of this.
So I mean retention of Border Patrol agents.
Okay.
We're losing Border Patrol agents in our most rural areas. And that's something, again, when you look at how money is being spent, we need to make sure we're getting those people on the ground.
Are you confident that this amount of money that has been passed is going to make a difference in your district?
I want to make sure that, and that's frankly, so I think that the agreement that was made was a good starting place. We had people, something that doesn't, I'm new to D.C., but I'm not so new that I don't know. This was we had people agreeing. We had Democrats and Republicans getting together into a room, finally, and agreeing on a bipartisan solution. So I think that's the start, and I think that's where we should focus instead of undermining that agreement by declaring a national emergency.
All right. Interesting perspective. We appreciate you being here. In D.C., they can always agree to spend more money. That's an easy agreement often to get. We're glad to have you. We'll have you back.
Thank you.
Good to see you, ma'am. Kristen?
Coming up, a new twist in the hate attack investigation involving Empire star Jussie Smollett. Why police just released 2 suspects. Plus, as Williams Barr spends his first weekend as America's new Attorney General, we'll talk to a former Justice Department official on how his appointment will affect the Mueller investigation. And as a vocal minority celebrates Amazon's pullout from a planned New York headquarters in New York City that would have created 25,000 new jobs, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tries to explain why they're so happy.
This is a celebration of is that everyday people in the community stood up and they wanted a say in what was happening in their own backyard.
Of Empire star Jussie Smollett, Chicago police officials now releasing 2 possible suspects, saying they, meaning the 2 people they interviewed, provided information that altered the course of the investigation. To break it down, Jonathan Hunt joining us now with that. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, Leland, this case really does become more bizarre by the day or even the hour. Those 2 men who were being questioned by police now released without charge. And here's what's odd. They were initially detained on Wednesday. They were described by police on Thursday simply as persons of interest. Then they were formally arrested on Friday morning and labeled potential suspects. By Friday evening, they were free men once again, with the Chicago Police Department spokesman saying, quote, due to new evidence as a result of today's interrogations, the individuals questioned by police in the Empire case have now been released without charging, and detectives have additional investigative work to complete. That statement came just hours after Chicago police had said they had probable cause to believe the suspects committed assault and battery against actor Jussie Smollett after he left a Subway sandwich shop in Chicago in the early hours of January 29th. The 2 men are apparently brothers. They are originally from Nigeria, and police say at least one of them worked with Smollett on the set of the Fox TV show Empire. Now, in the early stages of this investigation, police released security camera images of 2 men they said they wanted to talk to. Jussie Smollett was asked in an ABC News interview this week if he believed those 2 were the men whom he says attacked him, used racist and homophobic slurs, put a noose around his neck, and shouted, "This is MAGA country." Listen here.
I was there. For me, when that was released, I was like, okay, we're getting somewhere. I don't have any doubt in my mind that that's them. Never did.
Now, there have been reports, including from our own Matt Finn, our reporter in Chicago, that police have been looking into the possibility that the entire attack was staged. But on Thursday, a spokesman for the Chicago PD said those reports were, quote, unconfirmed. And today, that same spokesman told me Smollett is still, quote, the listed victim in this case. One final note, Leland, Jussie Smollett has now reportedly hired a high-priced defense lawyer. That may yet prove to be significant. Leland?
Well, and noteworthy that that statement by the Chicago police that you read brings up a lot more questions than it does answers. Jonathan Hunt in L.A., back to you as news warrants. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
2020 Democratic hopefuls are responding to President Trump's national emergency declaration, vowing to block the president from obtaining funds to build his proposed border wall. Garrett Tenney is live from the DNC winter meeting in Washington with more. Hi, Garrett.
Kristen, good morning to you. Good afternoon. This battle over the border wall is shaping up to be one of the leading issues of the 2020 presidential race, and many of the top Democrats looking to challenge President Trump are already weighing in on his plan to issue a national emergency declaration to build his wall.
Border security should always be a priority for our country. The question is, where do we need to put the resources to make sure that our border is safe? And what the president is doing right now is irresponsible and a misuse of public resources.
It's not a question of not wanting to keep the country safe, but what President Trump wants to do is build a medieval-style wall out of concrete, and one that will destroy not just the community, but the environment. And it is a hateful message.
Here at the DNC's winter meetings, there is a lot of focus on preparing for the 2020 elections. And today, Democrats are out in force on the campaign trail, holding events in key early voting states such as New Hampshire, Iowa, and South Carolina. Former Vice President Joe Biden, though, is mingling with world leaders today in Germany at the Munich Security Conference, where he spoke a short time ago and criticized the Trump administration's immigration policies.
The America I see values basic human decency, not snatching children from their parents or turning our back on refugees at our border. Americans know that's not right.
And this week, a source with direct knowledge told Fox News that Joe Biden is almost certain to enter the 2020 race, though an exact date on when he will do that is still up in the air. Kristen?
We'll be watching. Garrett Tenney, thanks so much.
You got it.
Leland.
All right, new legal challenges to President Trump's declaration of a national emergency on the southern border. The president in Florida for the long weekend. Phil Keating with him as well. Hi, Phil.
Hey, Leland. Currently 39 degrees in the nation's capital. 80 degrees and sunny here in Palm Beach County. Plenty of rich and famous are here for the big President's Day weekend. That includes the Trumps. Coming up, I will tell you exactly how he's spending this Saturday.
President Trump spending the long weekend down in Palm Beach. His team spending the President's Day weekend preparing their response to growing legal challenges over his national emergency declaration at the southern border. Phil Keating, part-time weather forecaster, full-time news reporter down in West Palm Beach. President's at his golf club. Looks like a pretty good day for it, huh, Phil?
Oh, it could not be more perfect down here. It's been in the 70s, now at 80 degrees. You know, the lawsuits first have been filed now against the president's national emergency declaration. More lawsuits certainly are to follow. And the president himself should be wrapping up his 18 holes of golf. He's been at his Trump International Golf Club since about 8:30 this morning. The White House certainly expected legal challenges against the national emergency declaration, and the administration has indicated they are prepared to fight. Air Force One and the First Lady, as well as the President, all landing in West Palm Beach last night around 6:30 p.m. There was a small crowd invited onto the tarmac, and President Trump and First Lady Melania greeted them warmly, even signing some autographs. Earlier Friday at the Rose Garden, President Trump announced he was signing the budget deal, averting another partial government shutdown, but also declaring a national emergency over the southern border with Mexico. And with that, he plans to take funds from other sources to spend more tax dollars for the wall than the compromise legislation gives.
And what we really want to do is simple. It's not like It's complicated. It's very simple. We want to stop drugs from coming into our country. We want to stop criminals and gangs from coming into our country.
Now, two people who disagree with the White House are California's governor and attorney general, both Democrats. California will be filing suit against the national emergency declaration and says the wall is nothing more than a vanity project.
For a monument to stupidity, a wall that will do nothing to impact drugs coming over our border. Ask any expert. Don't ask politicians. Certainly don't ask the President of the United States. Ask any expert how these drugs are getting across the border.
Yeah, most of the critics of the Trump wall say it's coming, the drugs are coming through regular ports of entry, hidden in cars and trucks actually. The first of the lawsuits already filed is on behalf of 3 Texas landowners and an environmental group. Again, the White House is certainly expecting these to come, and more of them will. He has no public events scheduled for the day, and I'm sure I mentioned at the top of this, Leland, it is beautiful and 80 degrees in Palm Beach County. Back to you.
And you look as though you're enjoying it as well. Our best to you and the crew. Thanks for being down there, Phil.
Yeah.
All right, Kristen.
Well, the former acting FBI director Andrew McCabe is saying in a 60 Minutes interview that Rod Rosenstein seriously discussed invoking the 25th Amendment against President Trump. For more on this, let's bring in former Justice Department prosecutor and partner at a law firm, James Trusty. Thank you so much for coming on.
Sure, great to be here.
So, James, let's start with this 60 Minutes interview with Andrew McCabe, which is going to be airing on Sunday night. If we could just play a clip of that, then I'll get your response on the other side.
A discussion of the 25th Amendment was simply Rod raised the issue and discussed it with me in the context of thinking about how many other cabinet officials might support such an effort.
Rosenstein was actually openly talking about whether there was a majority of the cabinet who would vote to remove the president.
That's correct. Counting votes or possible votes.
Now, Rod Rosenstein has disputed that account, but quite a charge. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there was a bar that only served people with bad credibility, you'd have Cohen, Avenatti, and McCabe as waiters. McCabe has had findings by the Inspector General that he lied on 3 or 4 occasions. He's trying to hawk a book. He's worried about a criminal case. He was fired in disgrace. And I think he's flailing around and repeating things to the media that just didn't happen.
And President Trump has clearly been coming out on Twitter, very forcefully speaking out against him as he's been talking about this book. But now you have Republican lawmakers calling on both McCabe and Rosenstein to come to Congress and testify. Do you think that we would get anything new out of that, or is this just going to continue to be more of a he said, she said?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, the political process that goes into these types of hearings tends to be a lot more about fireworks than truth. I'm not sure that the Inspector General will be able to get to the bottom of it either. That's obviously an alternative that we've been seeing in this Mueller probe. It's going to be tough, but I think that Rosenstein will hold up well to questioning about whether he did something as fantastic, as crazy as invoking the 25th Amendment.
Well, a lot of other news in the special counsel's investigation that I want to get to. The news that Paul Manafort violated his plea deal and a judge saying that he intentionally lied to the FBI. And I'd just like to read a very quick line from Mueller's sentencing memo for Manafort. He says, given the breadth of Manafort's criminal activity, the government has not located a comparable case with the unique array of crimes and aggravating factors. Quite the statement. What do you read into that?
Well, you know, it's a pretty common exercise for the government and for the defense to look at comparable cases and say, well, this guy only got X years or this guy got probation in support of their argument. But here they're talking about a case where Mr. Manafort was accused of obstruction before the trial, and then he was a breach cooperator, a failed cooperator, where they're trying to withdraw portions of the plea agreement. So it is unusual territory. There's a lot to talk about at that sentencing.
And so he's now facing, Mueller is recommending 20 to 24 years. I mean, that's essentially the rest of his life behind bars.
Yeah, it's a very big hit. I mean, the weird part of this is that the breach and all of the fighting about whether he lied and whether the lies were material is taking place in the D.C. case where there's only 10 years of exposure. But the trial case from Alexandria is wide open with a ton of exposure.
Yeah, well, that's going to be a lot to watch and a lot of new developments in the coming weeks and months. Jim Trusty, thank you.
Sure. Good to be here.
All right, so why are so many 2020 Democratic presidential hopefuls signing up for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's New Deal, including its war on every cow in America? And, gentlemen, start your engines. The Daytona 500 gearing up for the start. Rick Rymuth on the track as we speak. A New York Congresswoman blasting one of her own over the Amazon decision to cancel its planned New York City headquarters. She represents the area that Amazon would have created 25,000 jobs in and asked sarcastically, now we're protesting jobs. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez responded.
This is a celebration of is that everyday people in the community stood